Welcome, welcome, welcome. So we're not playing a game today. We are doing a read along on this amazing article from Polygon, Morrowind and Oral History. Spook, thank you for being here. Spook is from our Discord, and Spook, you want to say something to our community?
I'd like to ask how you got it to dark mode, because me is just a flashbang.
Oh, really? I use a plugin. Anyway, so Spook is here. The idea is to go over this article and basically read along. And whenever there's something interesting, or if you want to add something, we discuss, so certain points from this article. It's an extremely important article because this article gets a lot of original developers, and they start talking about what happened when they actually started creating Morrowind. So it's a very important piece of history, right, for the Elder Scrolls. So I thought it's a good idea to have this on our channel. So thanks, Spook, for joining us. And Spook has played all the Elder Scrolls games apart from Redguard, right?
Not the mobile games.
Mobile games, of course. Blades and Castle.
Oblivion on the Nokia. I've not played that.
Engage, yeah, I remember that. Oblivion on the Engage. Oh my god. Nokia Engage. What we'll do is we'll read one para, and then if there's anything that caught your eye, we'll talk about it. Then we'll do the same as we go along.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll go ahead with the first one, and then you can start with the next. Alright, Morrowind and Oral History. Here's a world. Go play it how you want to play it. That totally describes Morrowind. I like that. You'll never forget a place like Morrowind. It is something out of a dream, only you've actually been there. Maybe you used a mouse and keyboard or the Xbox controller to visit it, but that doesn't make it any less real. While hardly the first open world game of its kind, the third numbered entry in Bethesda's Elder Scrolls series cemented a formula and set of expectations that opened the door for games like Fallout 4 and Witcher 3. Oh, really? It was an artistic and technical leap forward for mainstream role-playing games in the summer of 2002, and for many, a beautiful and novel experience. A vast ashen landscape teeming with psychedelic flora and fauna, equal parts Jim Henson and George Lucas with a dash of Tolkien. It was a game that resembled no other. The people who made it, Morrowind was a product of a tough crunch, a pressure cooker basement environment, and a constant uncertainty about the company they worked for, which many felt could have shut down any day. But the island of Vardenfell, its unique pantheon of gods and demons, seemed to exist independent of the concerns upstairs. Whatever the company's fate, it seemed the game was destined to find an audience. In the darkest moments, when it seemed the writing was on the wall for Bethesda, project leader Todd Howard took the team to a nearby hotel for a private meeting. There, Howard rallied the developers' spirits, handed out personalized business cards, and assured them it would all work out, as long as they are willing to keep going. That speech, one source says, probably saved the company. Over the last year, we've tracked down 10 former Morrowind team members, including Howard, concept artist Michael Kirkbride, lead designer Ken Rolston, and others. We discuss the very conception of Vardenfell, the strangest bits of Elder Scrolls lore, and the shits and giggles philosophy that informed them, and what it means to build a game world that withstands the test of time. Awesome history.
Probably best to mention that this is written by Alex Kane.
Yeah.
This article.
Yes. By Alex Kane and illustrations by Ben Bocho. I think these illustrations look really cool. They are done by the Polygon staff, right?
Yes.
You have the Red Mountain here.
They are for the most part accurate.
Yeah. And here I think you have the cliff racers, and this looks like a velocity tower. Or some tower, not a velocity tower. And this, does it look like an armor? A recognizable armor? No. Alright.
It's very much like a outsider interpretation of what Morrowind is.
Right.
That's fine. It gets the feel across, I guess.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, if you think about it, the games didn't sell that well, right? They were not a well-known studio when Morrowind development was beginning.
Well, they were well known enough to have a forum and like a pretty dedicated cult fan base.
Right. So it's very niche fan base.
Yeah. Bethesda Softworks began developing and publishing games in 1986, beginning with the Gridiron, a football game for the Amiga and Atari ST. For nearly a decade, the company experienced a middling level of success due to a string of licensed hockey titles, as well as 5 games based on the Terminator film franchise. As time went on, the Elder Scrolls series changed all that, and there are many of the people who built it. Something to mention about that is the Terminator games that they did are not terrible.
Yeah, you've tried?
Or at least one of the Terminator games that I played that I'd probably have to look up the title of, because I think there are 3 of them along the same line of a lot of thousands of shooting games that were made post-Doom,
Right.
pre-Quake, where they were just trying to capitalize on Doom's success, pretty much.
Interesting. The fact that they went from an FPS and a sports game studio to fantasy.
Yeah. I think that's very notable that they went from probably the lowest of the low of just licensed like crap games to something like genuinely pretty unique. It all started with the floppy disk. I saw an ad in this old gaming magazine called Next Generation. I'd been doing some small video game shit with some friends that I went to college with, and that just kinda taught me Photoshop, because that game wasn't going anywhere. And at the back of Next Gen was this really pixelated ad for Bethesda. So I just sent off a bunch of shit I did on the side art-wise in Deluxe Paint 2. Sure enough, within like 2 weeks, Mark Jones, who was the art leader of the, wanted me for an interview. Mind you, I grew up in Alabama, so someone flying me anywhere was pretty fucking crazy. And the fact that he had a British accent was like alien, so I thought, oh god, I'm gonna screw this up. But I didn't screw it up, and then about 3 weeks later I was in a U-Haul going up there. Luckily they needed a 3D artist. I guess someone left, and Todd Howard was like, hey, wanna learn 3D? And I just screamed yes. Because my computer at home never did that, it wasn't that powerful. That was how I learned how to create levels and actually not do all the textures in Deluxe Paint 2 anymore. I'll say that I did that for an embarrassingly long time. Todd made fun of me for doing most of Redguard, and even the beginnings of Morrowind in Deluxe Paint 2.
Awesome. I think you're too young to remember this book, but there was a time when we had magazines and we had attached floppy disk or a CD-ROM, and we used to download shareware games from those floppies or CDs and play them.
Yeah, that was before my time.
Before your time, exactly. I used to subscribe to such magazines in interesting days. Anyway, let's move on. Mark Nelson, writer and quest designer. Out of school, I'd work in PR. I'd worked as an editor, and then I was doing instructional design for a company. And then I became friends with one of the programmers there, this guy named Mike Depari. He was a big fan of Bethesda's games and a fantastic programmer, and knowing they were local, he kept pestering them for a job. Eventually, they sort of rented, and he managed to find his way in there. About 6 months later, I got an email from him saying, hey, we need somebody who likes video games and who can write and is willing to work for pencil shavings. So I went in and interviewed with Ken and interviewed with Todd. For some reason, they hired me. I know Ken was not really sure about it. I think he was actually a dissenting voice in the room, but it ended up working out. I'll finish this. Noah Berry. It was a lucky break. Serendipitous. I had gone to the same school as the lead artist Mark Carafano and saw online that he'd gotten hired at Bethesda, and they were also getting ready to ramp up a hiring wave of folks to help basically build the world. I think they spent a year or so getting the engine up and running, the nuts and bolts of the background, the landscape and the lighting, and the raw primordial design stuff. So they were ready to hire folks to start making assets and fleshing out and actually creating the game itself. I was fresh out of school and looking for a job, and it was definitely a title that I was super passionate about and wanted to play. I was a big Ultima fan and always had the sense that Elder Scrolls series was kind of spiritual successor to those games. They probably hired me from a background. I majored in fine art. At that time, there wasn't a lot of access to computer-specific art or education, or game-related education. So I suspect they were probably a little more open-minded in terms of who they hired. And it probably went a long way that I was a fan of the games on the same wavelength, so to speak, as the creators themselves. Okay. Interesting. So, a couple of things. I think I read that sometime in 1999 and 2000, Bethesda purchased a licensed copy of the NetImmerse engine, so which later evolved to be the Gamebryo engine for Oblivion and Fallout 3. And the NetImmerse engine was used for Morrowind, and I think that's what he was saying. They spent a year or so getting the engine up and running. So I guess they got the engine, they customized it, and made it for Morrowind, right?
Yeah, well, they made Red Guard prior, probably to really just see what their limits were, I assume.
Essentially, they abandoned all the work that was done in Daggerfall. They never looked back.
I think they just recognized that, especially with, like, Quake
Right.
happening, you couldn't really do anything on DOS anymore, or you had to just push forward.
Exactly. So, yeah, interesting.
There's also the reference to Ultima, which I would agree with.
Yes.
I feel like
I've heard a lot about this Ultima.
Influenced. Yeah.
I think this was a huge RPG series back in the 80s, started in the 80s, right?
Yes, it went through pretty much everything. It went from, like, ASCII art to full-on, like, 2D graphics, dungeon crawling, to eventually sort of, it feels like a bit of an insult to say Daggerfall-esque, but, you know, it's like System Shock. It was like that kind of thing. It was on the same engine as System Shock, actually, prior.
Amazing.
So, that sort of, immersive simulator, first-person dungeon crawler, I can see that inspiring, Elder Scrolls stuff later on down the track.
In some interviews, Todd did say that he was a big fan of Ultima too. So Ultima must have inspired a lot of people who were trying to make.
Well, it was like the first big RPG thing. Like a lot of JRPGs were just direct sort of rips of Ultima for the Japanese audience, and it kind of just spiraled out of control from there. My job at Leaping Lizard was actually maybe a mile away from Bethesda. And what happened there was that Chris Green, the lead programmer and owner of Leaping Lizard, had created Magic the Gathering Online. We did that cold. He did that as a pet project, and then presented that to Wizard of the Coast and to Hasbro, because we had the relationship with Hasbro already, and he was a Magic the Gathering fan. A lot of people assumed that we were contracted to do it. We went in and presented it. He's like, I have an idea. You could do this online. And they were not initially receptive. The whole idea of digital goods hadn't really gotten traction in reality yet. It was a little bit of a harder sell. So I was kind of like, well, the art for this game has been done, the design for this game has been done. Essentially, I just would have been building some UI assets and everything, and I was working with a fellow, Chris Andrus, who had come to work at Leaping Lizard. He had left Bethesda, and he's like, they're hiring, you may want to check out what they're doing. So I went in and looked, and fell in love with the whole concept. Because I wanted to do something that was an actual world-building exercise. Imagine my delight. I was really valuable for Bethsoft and for Morrowind before the tools were ready. What I'm great at is a blank page. I can create a world in like 2 weeks. I've documented enough within 3 months that will support 30 months of development. And because I came from the paper and pencil gaming thing, and I will take 2 or 3 months to develop an entire setting with all of its narrative elements. So what they got me for was self-confidence in creating the background necessary for everybody to have a shared language of what the place looked like and where people were.
Interesting. I like the confidence.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
From my experience.
Yeah. I think Ken Rolstone did a lot of writing, right? If you see the dialogue with Vivek and all that in Morrowind, all of that apparently was Ken Rolston. So.
He was credited for, I think, just writing a bunch of supplements and modules and things for old school role-playing systems.
So, Michael Kirkbride was a Patterson writer. There were like 9 people there, dude. It was small. But to me, that's just how you did it, right? Because if these guys flew you up and they had a demo for Skynet, and it was a magazine about video games, you figured they were legit. And everybody was like 20 or early 20s. I think the first video game company I'd been at, you just take it for granted. You don't even think about it. It was cool. It was a lunchroom. Ken didn't get hired until maybe a few months after I got there, because the very first time I remember seeing Ken was at the Daggerfall postmortem or something like that. I think we had already finished Skynet. Okay, so Ken Rolstone joined after Kirkbride. Eric Parker, programmer. To my knowledge, I was the first programmer hired to work on the project. When I got there, it was me and one other guy, Craig Walton. Craig was kind of a fixture, so we used to joke that we just found him sitting there, and so we built the company around him. And there was literally nothing. We were starting from scratch and wanted to write a new engine. Very early on, a lot of the work was getting things up and running, to a point where we could load assets and see things in game. Initially, I worked on the user interface and then later switched over on working on collision. I like to tell people that if you ever fell through the world of Morrowind or got stuck on a piece of geometry, that was my fault. I like to think the collision was better than it was in Daggerfall. Not to say anything about Daggerfall, it was a great game, but also notoriously buggy. Bethesda was a division of ZeniMax. If I remember right, there were 5 divisions, like the web division and so forth. Those were all fairly separate from what they were doing. But I didn't originally interview for Morrowind. I interviewed for the tech team. I was with the interviewer and we were talking about different games that we liked. And literally in the middle of the interview, he got up and took me to meet Todd. I told Todd that I loved RPGs and he wanted to talk to me. So that's how I ended up working on Morrowind. Full story.
I think the collision in Morrowind is slightly better than it is in Daggerfall Vanilla. Just because in Daggerfall you could literally just slip through like a seam between dungeon pieces and just fall into the void forever.
Yeah, but I've fallen through the world even in Morrowind too. So it's a common thing.
You haven't played DOS Daggerfall. You've only played the Unity.
Oh, really?
Bug fixes.
I can imagine. Yeah. You actually installed a DOS Daggerfall, not the Unity, right? You actually played the pixelated version.
Yeah, the first time I played it on DOSBox.
Wow. You can do that.
The first thing I remember is walking in the door to the basement and seeing some guy to my right who was ultimately not even part of the Bethesda team, but under some other arm of the company, and he was doing some pornographic website work. My first impression is this guy looking at nude photos, and I'm like, what kind of place is this? Literally the moment I walked into the space to interview, there's porn on the monitor.
I think ZeniMax did a lot of things. They had gaming department and
oh yeah, it was just mentioned they had some kind of web department.
Yeah. Interesting.
They have many arms. It was bizarre. They'd come off of Daggerfall and Arena and they'd done Battlespy and Redguard, which obviously hadn't been huge hits, but the company was growing. I came right in the middle without changing spaces, so working in a giant empty warehouse space on long card tables. I had no idea what to expect. It was kind of my first job in the industry. I'd come in because they needed a writer and they immediately had me doing level design. It made no sense to me, but that's what they decided we were going to do. So everybody had to know how to do everything. At that point we had a design team of about 3 with Ken, me and Doug. No one had time to check what anyone else was doing and you just kind of had to trust everybody. You jam stuff into the game as fast as humanly possible and hope that it worked and break everybody else's stuff. It was like working out in the Wild West. There were no rules, we didn't have any QA, we just kind of tested our own stuff and tried to get it done quickly. It was a heck of a lot of fun, quite honestly.
I was reading about Battlespy. Apparently they had a multiplayer component of part of that game. Player versus player deathmatch. Yep. And you played Battlespire, right?
Yeah.
Was it similar to Daggerfall? In did you have like labyrinthian dungeons there too?
No. It was like a linear sort of adventure game type thing, with a Daggerfall styled, right, dungeon and combat and stuff.
Right. I guess after working on these 2 spin-offs, they never bothered about thinking about spin-offs because they didn't get a good reception, I guess, in these 2 games. And since then, we never had a spin-off, right? This was the last.
No, there was Dawnstar and Shadowkey, the first mobile games.
Alright, Divine Spark. You have a niche that seems too long, according to me. Anyway.
No. That's a that's a Silt Strider floating in the air.
Silt Strider, exactly.
Someone's wires got crossed, I think. They saw like a bull edge, and then just assumed that a Silt Strider was also able to float like that. A weird one.
It's like an airship. Cool.
Someone put a levitation spell on it. It hasn't run out.
Just imagine. Levitation spell on a Silt Strider. Wow. Alright, Divine Spark. This is the second section. First section was about how people got into the company. And this is the second section, Divine Spark. After serving as a producer on a pair of Terminator titles and then as a designer on Daggerfall, Todd Howard became the project leader on the Elder Scrolls Adventures Redguard, which shipped in 1998. A commercial flop at launch, Redguard is notable for being the first Elder Scrolls entry to lean heavily on in-universe lore and world building. In the Pocket Guide to the Empire, a print booklet packaged with the game, Bethesda laid the groundwork for Morrowind, ultimately the company's future. Okay, so this was when the old team left, right? I mean, Ted Peterson left way back, and then I think Julian Lefebvre too left before this project, and since then Todd, he was a project leader on all the games.
Yes, I think Julian Lefebvre left when Tribunal kind of fell on its face,
right,
and that didn't end up being made.
Right. The idea for Tribunal, the sequel to Daggerfall, was every ending would be explained in the second game, right? The third game. That never happened anyway.
Yeah, they wanted, like, it was pretty lofty. It was the idea that you'd, like, carry over your character, and then there'd be, like, things that happened in the previous game would affect the current game, and so on.
Pretty crazy.
And I think ultimately that wasn't really feasible for one reason or another.
Also, another key thing, the Pocket Guide to the Empire is a very important book, which is found in-game and also apparently a printed booklet. So the Redguard started this concept. So you have
the Retcon book.
The Retcon book, exactly. Pocket Guide to the Empire, first edition. Then you have second edition, which was in Morrowind, right? And third edition, Oblivion. After that, we never saw it.
It was a really good idea.
Right.
Initially. And it had a lot of unique stuff in it, but then, for some reason or another, they just, like, didn't float. So it's like, oh, actually, we don't really care about a lot of the stuff in here, so...
They don't care about it. Okay. Especially with Elder Scrolls 5 Skyrim, right? It was set 200 years later. I expected we'd have a 4th edition Pocket Guide, but I guess at that point they stopped caring. If you look at all the books in Skyrim, most of the books are Morrowind books. Books from Morrowind.
Sure.
Alright. Okay, Michael Kirkbride, he talks about the Divine Spark. The unsung hero of Elder Scrolls is probably Kurt Kuhlman, and he was hired on the same day I was. He did these exclusive quests for JCPenney or some shit for Daggerfall, and we had this grand idea for like a Pirates on Mars game. We were talking about tech we didn't have, and we pitched this idea to Todd at the time. And he's like, you know what? I like pirates. And everybody knows this game, Daggerfall. So let's just make a pirate game in Daggerfall. And we're like, fuck yeah. The way Todd and I bonded was doing this kind of fake-in world stuff in the manual. And we wanted to do something like that for Redguard. Eventually, when the game came out, it would come out in the manual. And that's when we realized we knew fuck all about the world. There was nothing except Daggerfall, which is very small. There maybe was a timeline stuck somewhere. Just a bunch of names and stuff like that. And so much of it was kind of just coming out of D&D game that the original Bethesda guys had done. And most of those guys were gone. So we started obsessing about the world or whatnot. For some reason, you can't make a pirate game without deciding how the universe got created. So that's when we really dug into it and started making a backstory that didn't exist. So that the rest of everything just felt real. At that time, Vardenfell came up as this tracing, the world story that I told Kurt over lunch. Kurt was a big Lord of the Rings fan, but also a weird fantasy fan. And he turned me on to Gene Wolfe and all that. And since Redguard was set in the past of what would become Morrowind, we got first dibs on how everything was created. So the whole heart of Lorkhan and all that stuff came out of those rebellions on our part. We're like, oh yeah? Well, this is how it was created. That famous volcano is all from a pitch or a ham sandwich. Oh, there's a lot here. Lots here. Yeah, they didn't do quests for JCPenney. I think Kurt Kuhlman created Daggerfall quests for Comp USA. So there were extra.
Yes, that was
it. Yeah, some extra quests, right? If you buy a Comp USA edition, you get these extra quests. If not, screw you. But of course, now you have everything. You get all those quests.
I didn't play Redguard because it's just a linear adventure game and it's not very good. Yeah. So, this is no point to it. Yeah.
I read somewhere that in Redguard is the only game where we actually listen to Dwemerus. So all that Dwemer, the history of Dwemer and the ancient race, Heart of Lorkhan, all that lore, bits of that here. And that carried on into Morrowind anyway.
The look of the game came from Michael Kirkbride, and I would say that it's not just the visual aesthetic. All of the narrative aesthetic of Morrowind also comes from Michael. I might have been the narrative lead, but Michael was a luminary, the man with spectacularly exotic and bad judgment that excited us so much. He also wrote things like his Sermons of Vivek. There's a website, The Metaphysics of Morrowind, that talks about how his gods are the most intriguing gods in Age of Fantasy universe, and the tragic stories of the three heroic demigods that done were trying to save the world but being corrupted. Did they really murder Nerevar? All those ideas. And he's a rare talent in that he's a very good illustrator, not just in terms of making it readable, but making it ethically vibrant. He did the original map of Morrowind, which was the foundation of the different terrains and geographical experiences. It was absolutely essential, and also crazy as a rat in a drain pipe, which is necessary. Someone had to be really, really, really crazy, and it's better that your lead designer isn't.
Next.
The game was originally set in the summer styles, and we got bored and decided, man, this is really boring. How about we put it in a volcano with like giant bugs everywhere? And people were like, what? So Todd Howard, the easiest way to get anything past Todd at that time, was you basically just had to say Star Wars, which was true for me and anybody then. So I was like, the game should be like Dark Crystal meets Star Wars, and he was immediately hooked. I got all the bug creatures I ever needed. We moved it from Somerset Isles to this weird dark elf place on the map, and we just went from there. I was doing double duty on the world art for Redguard and writing some of that one, and then just creating all the history of Morrowind. And poor Ken, he had thought up the original Elder Scrolls 3, the one in Somerset, and then involved a lot of Elizabethan court intrigue kind of things, where we were like, wouldn't it be cooler if it was this reincarnated guy versus this triumvirate of gods? Wouldn't that be cool? And ash everywhere, and bugs? You can see a recurring theme. Somerset was the plan that had been given to Ken, and he rolled with it. In some obscure interview or something, the guys that did Daggerfall were like, in the next Elder Scrolls game, we're gonna go to the land of the elves, and some other bullshit. It was called Tribunal then. That's where Ken was like, okay, I can write about elves, great. That's also how the Tribunal ended up in the expansion. We basically repurposed that idea of 3 elves in charge. They weren't gods at the time. In Ken's original idea, he tried to transplant some of that to the Dark Elves, because they're sexier, and in D&D the Dark Elves are all about court intrigue. We're just like, hey, but what about bugs?
Oh my god, so funny. Especially this part, right? Where he says, what about reincarnated guy versus gods? What about Ash? What about bugs?
I mean, maybe this is just, like, misremembered detail, but the Tribunal in the expansion, because the Tribunal were already part of the background in the main game. You don't really see them in the expansion, but maybe there was plans to actually have something about Vivek and all that show up in the DLC. I don't know.
When you start Tribunal DLC, by then Vivek is out of the picture. You don't see him in Tribunal DLC, right? You don't see...
Well, you don't really interact with the Tribunal in the Tribunal DLC. Spoilers.
Yeah,
the name kind of lies to you.
Yeah, Almalexia. Mostly is the person you meet.
Yeah.
And not even... What about Sotasil? Any dialogue with him?
No.
No! Oh no. I see. So mostly about Almalexia.
Yeah.
I see. Alright. Noah Berry, environment artist. We always started with key phrases or ideas like that and then branched out from there. From that volcano in Vattenfell, this ash theme became a huge kind of aesthetic and cohesive direction to run with. Ashley Chang, associate producer. Even today, there aren't that many games that have Morrowind's distinct look and feel. And I don't know if we would have gotten the same look and feel if we had set it in Somerset Islands. Matt Carafono, the artist. Michael is an awesome guy. He had crazy ideas that were really different. He basically had been working for like a year maybe on Morrowind concept sketches when I started. And I think it was kind of just him, Todd and Ken Rolston coming up with design ideas. So he had a good stack of images and we had them plastered up in this room. So the whole room was covered wall to wall with all of Kirkbride's sketches. We called it the War Room. It was very inspirational because they were all pen and ink sketches. Really rough, really loose. But it gave a vibe of everything, from what were dark elves like, what they look like, what do their clothes look like, all the way to the landscape, which had these giant mushroom trees. There was a little bit of everything. It became sort of a style guide for the game, the cultural darkness. Ooh. So, the mushroom trees, the look of the world, all that was from Kirkbride. A lot of concept art was done for like almost a year. And then real artists came in, turning those concept arts into actual assets.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And presumably there was a bit of waiting on the Gamebryo engine.
Right. Alright. Hook, you can do the next two.
The concept art came very early. So much so that I got in trouble with Todd. We came up with a war room and I just filled it with drawings, and Kurt, who was then ostensibly the main quest designer for Morrowind, we would just get all excited about something over a ham sandwich or endless ham sandwiches, and I'd have to draw it. So Todd finally sat me down and he's like, "Dude, I need you to work on Redguard more." We were just a bunch of kids making shit up, and Ken was our wise uncle trying to corral us in and make the crazy shit into a story that could be told. Essentially, everything that was kind of distinctive, the bugs, and ash, and giant mushrooms, they basically all came from what I was scared of when I was a kid. My dad used to try to make me go camping, and when I was real little, mushrooms were like these aliens. So what's the best way to beat up something that you're scared of? Just make it really fucking big, and camp in it, live in it, and claim it. Plus, it looked cool on the page, and it was all about extremes in the earliest drawings. It went from Dark Crystal and Star Wars to Dune. There's a lot of Dune influence, that kind of Baroque society. So that quote kind of, I guess justifies the early one.
Yeah.
But it was Kirkbride's idea for the bugs and mushrooms.
Mushrooms, yeah. Amazing. Alright.
Pete Hines. Morrowind, I think, achieved this level of weirdness and diversity that is pretty unique for a Bethesda Game Studios title. You know, you go to Sadanin or Alderaan and all these different weird, eclectic places. These guys grow their own houses out of these crazy mushrooms, and these guys use bugs to make their armor. It was really this sort of alien-feeling game in a way a lot of other BGS games have dabbled in. I don't know if any of them did to the extent that Morrowind did.
Mark Nelson, writer and quest designer. I was always on the fence about Vardenfell. I loved it for its quirkiness, but those things were straight out of Kirkbride fever dreams. To me at least, they got his stamp all over it. But it's not as approachable for your average gamer. It's a little hard to figure out what's going on. You don't have the same number of common touchstones that you find in 98% of the fantasy out there. And if you're new coming into something that can be, if you're new coming into something that can be tough. I think that people would have had a much different reaction if Oblivion and Cyrodiil had been earlier. And now they were going to release something like Morrowind. Back then, it was a tougher sell for a lot of people, including me. It was this bizarre world, and that's where all of Ken's work was so important, because he had figured all that stuff out, and you could have these discussions with him and go, who hates who? Why do these guys not like each other? Why are there giant mushrooms? What the fuck's a netch? It was a lot to take in. Interesting.
Oh, the book reference to Cyrodiil had been earlier.
Ooh, just imagine. It should have been a tropical place. I don't know if it
would have been a diverse place. There would have been, like, different climes.
North
and south, at least. That was, like, my minimum expectation.
But we wouldn't have had bugs and all that, so glad, thank God.
And there would have been bugs.
Bugs, really?
Probably.
Okay, netch. So funny. Okay, Michael Kirkbride, concept artist. I used to have this thing with Todd because he was one of those. He was one of the ones that's like, let's not make this too weird. So I'd bamboozle him. There was a period where I would actually draw two different versions of a monster. The one that was weird and the one that I wanted to be in the game. And then the one that was fucking crazy. So I'd go to Todd and I'm like, okay, I think I've got the mid-level creature set. And I'd show him the picture. He'd be like, nah dude, that's crazy. Then I'd go back to my office and I would act like I was drawing something new. And I'd come back with the original drawing of what I really wanted it to be like in there. Hey, is this what you were thinking? He'd be like, oh yeah, that's much better, thanks, that's great. You should play a game with Todd, huh? I like
that. Reminds me of the story about Epic Mickey, that Disney game on the Wii,
We.
where they wanted to make a dark Disney game, and they needed to provide like I guess art of the game, of like what it would look like to get approval for it. And so they just drew like the most horrific stuff available to them to be like try and like push the boundary as far as they could before they actually sent in the real stuff. And some of that is very funny to look at.
Yeah.
When I first walked through the doors at ZeniMax and walked into the war room and saw Kirkbride's simple line sketches, I think they were usually just done with a pen. It was raw, it captured energy, and I was like, what am I looking at? This feels like a real place. But it's not your usual revamped European fantasy. I'm getting a heavy dose of Star Wars meets something primitive meets Joseph Campbell. And that's why I immediately fell in love when I knew I wanted to be part of the project. I think the very first sketch I saw was of Dunmer housing, and there was just this immediacy to it. The world felt like it had a strong story, it was grounded in its own rules, and while it felt somewhat alien, was still accessible. I think that's the genius of these games, and especially Morrowind in particular. The world was real, it had rules, it had its history. Because the world was just getting stranger and stranger, we wrote a whole bunch of stuff that definitely got refined over time, and went in different directions. After the Pocket Guide to the Empire, which was sort of the gazetteer of the world, Red God, I just kept getting obsessed with how the world began. We've got this pantheon of 8 gods, and yet every single one of the cultures kind of recognizes them, and that doesn't make sense at all. They're all different races and whatnot, so what does that mean? And I'm like, let's bring in some books on quantum mechanics and it'll totally make sense. So we all had kind of different agendas in the creation of the world that we knew would dovetail into Morrowind, and the true north of that was a quote, "Tell me the dog story." I don't know if Ken got that somewhere or not, but Kurt Coleman, my boon companion, he'd made a board game about the Peloponnesian War, and whenever I would go crazy with something in the society, he would always bring it back to logistics. If these guys are enslaving people, why? What does it do for them financially? What does it do to borders? Ken said, you know you tell God's story, and Kurt tells the farmer's story or the soldier's story, but I want to know the dog story. And I'm like, what? That sounds wise. It doesn't matter that we all have these mythic heroes and all this magic and this unlikelihood. How does the pet regard it when it's getting under the table? And it was a very great way to work. We'd slide between these, I wouldn't call them specialties, but just what appealed to us. So much like Kurt would take my stuff and interrogate the logistics of it, Ken would turn around and make it into a homily that they sing at the temple or whatever, and all of that just made it feel more real. So that when they really did start development, we just knew what the world was. That helped a lot. I've never done something like that with a group of people since.
Wow, awesome. That was a great quote. You tell a god story, you tell a farmer's story or a soldier's story, but I want to know the dog's story. That is so Morrowind, right? Think about it. All the stories of the Ashlander, stories of the dissident priests, all the small minor factions who just want to do something good or want to simply exist. They're the dog stories.
Like writing a story especially, you don't really want to get too caught up in like the protagonists or whatever. You kind of need to flesh the outside world out a little bit more so it doesn't just seem like an artificial thing.
Right. Ken Rolston. I was a serene beacon of confidence and competence, at least from their point of view. But in truth, I was just bluffing every bit as much as they were. I learned a lot of art and programming. I have no mastery on those areas, but I was quick to learn the narrative wrappers on the big ideas and a lot of different crafts, so I could talk with other people. So in a way, they were mentors for me with the content, but I was a mentor at managing ignorance and making forward movement. A useful go-between person. Because, for example, my notion of good documentation always has to have images in it with captions. It also has to have maps with detailed legends in them. And the artists were able to read that sort of thing. In the sense that my creation of documentation spoke effectively to not just writers, but to programmers and artists as well. I was like a mentor figure. But mostly, I was a mentor figure because I wasn't afraid of what we were doing. I thought what we were doing was almost certainly going to end in disaster, but it was exciting because it was something that hadn't been done before. And I believe almost everybody else understood that instinctively. But they were young and they had a good reason to say, I don't know what's going on. It didn't bother me though. So Ken was like a guide to most of the developers at that time, I guess.
I mean, from what he says, less that he was a guide and more just he appeared to be one.
He appeared to be a guide. Because the other guys were just throwing ideas over, right?
Yeah, he was just trying to keep it under control, I guess.
Right. It was very important. Alright, Todd. Project leader. It was one of those projects that got talked about and worked on a little bit in spurts over a period of time. It was after Daggerfall, and there were few people thinking about Morrowind, but most people were split between Battlespire and Redguard. And Redguard was the game that I led. As time went on, that team became the predominant team, which then went on to start Morrowind. This would have been 1998 or 1999, and the dev staff was very tiny then. At one point, I want to say it got down to like 6 people to put the teams together. But it was a bad time. Bethesda was about to go under, and that's when ZeniMax Media got formed. I met with the key people, and they didn't really know me then to say, what do you want to do? For me, it was kind of a no fear moment. Well, it can't get any worse, right? We're about to go out of business, and now we have a lifeline, so you better take advantage of it. It's one of those things where you go through some tough times development-wise, and when you're given another shot, my view was not to be conservative. We aimed very, very high with what we wanted the game to be.
That is very ironic. Because as soon as there was a stable sort of income,
right,
it became the complete opposite. It was aim very, very low.
They didn't bother to aim very, very high. For them, I think it made money for them, for the company, right? I think Morrowind was the reason the company didn't go bust after that.
It was at least good enough that there was a response from Microsoft, who then wanted it on Xbox.
Right.
And then I think it actually ended up selling a lot more on Xbox.
Oh yeah, okay. So
and that was where the kind of deal for Oblivion came in, because they wanted it as a launch title, I think, for 360.
So ultimately, creating Morrowind for Xbox kind of helped the company in a way.
If they didn't do that, then they probably wouldn't have been approached for the 360 launch title.
Right.
For Oblivion, which was like the biggest sell. Because I don't think Halo was a launch title at that point, or Halo 2, whatever, maybe it was.
Microsoft needed games, and they needed a big name. So yeah,
yep.
It was key.
So they made them a big name, for better or worse. Our inspiration was always just a mixture of our favourite movies, fantasy films, previous video games, the pop culture soup that we'd all absorbed growing up. So Morrowind was a huge blend of medieval fantasy, over-the-top high fantasy, in these Dune-like, really foreign-feeling locations. We'd have these sub-zones in the landscapes that really drove thematically what that place in the game should feel like. We tried to give lots of opportunities for both the creators and the player to experience a wide variety of cool things to look at, a cool place to be in. Everyone loved a good RPG, everyone loved Fallout. I played a lot of the Icewind Dale and Baldur's Gate stuff. Todd was always playing racing games and sports games. If there was a football game, he was playing it. Ultima was a big one with a lot of people. Tunnels and Trolls was a mimeographed, cheap and cheerful rip-off of Dungeons & Dragons, and that was my first contact with RPGs. I didn't see D&D for another 2 or 3 years. I had a completely different notion of what role-playing games would be, and it was a rules-light, light-tone epic fantasy, but completely ironic and trashy. There was no wargaming element in it at all, in the sense you would just do whatever for shits and giggles. In many ways, that was an underlying impulse, a tone challenge to epic D&D, which is about trying to save princesses and worlds and dragons beating up on dragons. Because the gameplay around the table was often at right angles to that, people wanted to have fun, and I think I probably strongly integrated into my notion of fun, in that cheap and cheerful way, was more important than the epic thing. Now they had to live in conflict, but I was also a rules hack. I was not even slightly interested in the rules, so I became a narrative designer. I've never had entry-level skills in rule systems, achievements, things like that. I simply assisted other people who provided those, with very low standards for seriousness.
Rules light and light tone epic fantasy. So you mean less rules when playing tabletop?
Yeah, like, I would say the majority of RPGs are just RPGs. D&D is like kind of on the low end of that, in terms of there's actually very little role-playing, it's mostly just game. Higher up on the scale you have things that are almost entirely just role-playing. Like, last week we played Fiasco, which is just like kind of piecing a narrative together. That was quite fun.
Right.
And then I think like alternating weeks, we tend to kind of mix up how much gaming we do versus how much is just sort of improv, collaborative storytelling type thing.
So you're saying D&D had a rules-light system?
No.
No? It's heavy. D&D is very heavy? Okay.
D&D is, well, I mean, modern D&D is just like a travesty, but it is pretty much just like wargaming. It's just combat.
I see.
Very little real role-playing going on.
Like the Witcher tabletop games?
Oh, it was trash.
Oh, trash? Really? Okay.
Yeah, that was terrible. I mean, but mostly it was just very poorly written and designed.
So what are the top three according to you?
Oh god, top three. Well, GURPS is number one. Call of Cthulhu is somewhere in there. I really like Wicked Ones. And Fiasco, as I mentioned before.
Ooh.
There are a lot. I've played a lot. And there are many in my library. I think I have like probably hundreds and uncountable amounts.
Right.
Just on my hard drive.
Amazing.
That time was not just about getting Morrowind done, it was the recreation of Bethesda. It was, what kind of development team do we want to be? How are we going to do certain things? I did the initial programming because there weren't a lot of people, so I wrote the first demo for Morrowind. I wrote the beginnings of the editor, poorly, I'll add. Not a very good programmer, but we didn't have many options, and I was doing a lot of design. It was a sky's the limit kind of moment, but we needed to bring in a lot of people to pull it off. Bethesda parent company ZeniMax gave me a lot of rope. Do what you think is best.
Next.
Noah Berry. The job was brand new for me, so I was already kind of enthralled by that, and not having the weight of hindsight. Some innocence and naivety went a long way towards just letting passion take the wheel. We were trying to do something new in many ways, while still being fueled by these games that had come prior that we were all big fans of. That's certainly why I was there. I'd been following Morrowind previews in magazines before I was even hired by the company, so I was already on board with the idea. I wonder if you can find some of those Morrowind previews.
Reviews.
Unfortunately, there's no date given for that.
Okay, I'll do the next two. Okay, the premise of the game came from Kurt and me. The idea that you were a reincarnation of somebody. You're kind of a nobody in Daggerfall, and we wanted to go the other way, where you were a big deal. I think Ken hated that at that time, because he really loves the idea of a stranger, and I totally get the appeal of that. Ken's contribution, which made it sing, was to say, okay, if we do this, then we never confirm it. So we never outright say, yes, you are the hero, the Netherverine. Even in the last final battle with the bad guy, you can go, no, I'm not. Everybody thinks I am, but I'm not. And then we would never, as a company, confirm either way, because it's your story. We got onto our own forums and started role-playing with one another and trying to build the world and just testing the voices out. We were purposely contradictory about all those things, so that we just built this way of working where the only info that would come out of Bethesda about the world had built-in plausible deniability. In Daggerfall, when you start Daggerfall, you are sent by the Empire, right? You're sent by the Emperor.
Yes.
So you are somebody that the Emperor trusts. And
well, it's more like you are sent there to do something, but the actual significance of that can go either way, because either you're just an Imperial agent sent to kind of fit in with the natives' view of things, or you actually are some prophesized hero.
Right.
Or I suppose really early on, before your character even discovers any of that, you can just like leave. Just do whatever you want.
Yeah, once you finish Privateer's Hold, you can do whatever you want, right? Ken wanted the character to be a nobody. He says he really loved the idea of the stranger.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody told you at the start that you are the Nerevarine, you need to go and do this.
It kind of does the opposite. It tells you both at the same time. Because, like, the very opening of Morrowind is the dream, where Zero tells you that you're the chosen one or whatever.
Oh,
And then immediately after, Job is like, you're dreaming.
Right. So you just assume it's a dream.
Yeah, and then that is then repeated later on in the game, because when you get all the way to Dagoth, it's pretty much like the exact same thing happens. Dagoth tells you that you're the chosen one, and then you can just immediately deny it.
Right.
So I think that, like, it worked out. I mean, you can say that you're the prophesized one, or you can just assume that you're some imperial, like, plant, basically, that's just sent there to fulfill the prophecy conditions, but not actually be the prophesized one.
Right. Of course, in Oblivion and Skyrim, they went against this principle.
Well, yeah. Oblivion almost had it, but the intro just completely ruins it, which is a shame.
Yeah, in Skyrim at least you were a nobody from Cyrodiil, and you were in the cart, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, but in Oblivion, the Emperor himself says, "Yep, I saw you."
You are the one from my dreams.
And you have to rush to Verin Prairie. Come on, let's go.
Yeah. Here's the fast travel point. Click it on your map.
I wonder how the start will be in Elder Scrolls 6. You are the desert born. You need to.
You are the sword born.
So, I'm sure it's going to be something like that. You will. It has to be, right? You are someone nowadays in Elder Scrolls. You are the one, chosen one.
You must go to Yellowrun.
Yellowrun. You're chosen by Tall Papa, and you are the desert born, sword born. Oh my god, so funny, man. Anyway, let's move on.
And the dragons are here.
Dragons? Really? Oh my god. If they get dragons in, again I'm done.
I would bet anything that they'll put dragons in it.
Oh really?
They went back to Elder Scrolls Online twice to add dragons. They're gonna do it for Elder Scrolls 6.
Oh my god.
It'll be like super mutants in Fallout. They just can't help themselves. It's never dogmatic. We will tell the stories basically from a character's point of view, and we were always very careful that anything that was presented was told from that specific viewpoint. So you had conflicting notions of what went on in the world. What happened to the Dwemer? Well, one group says this, another says that. What happened in Red Mountain? What was great about that is you would actually have factions develop on the design team. Vivek and his buddies were actually the bad guys, and they usurped their power. And, you know, Dagoth, our main villain, he was the victim in all this. You had the room to do that back and forth. So whenever we would present any history, it was never quite like, well, the dwarves disappeared because of the following reasons. Each race has their version of what's the truth, and that's kind of the magic of it all.
The beauty of this story is that everything is kept ambiguous, right? About the main characters.
For the most part.
Yeah.
I think I would actually hate it if it was 100% ambiguous, but there's like, you know, there's enough there. You can reach everything up until the ultimate conclusion of things, or like the process or method of things, but like in the end there is like a concrete story or conclusion.
Great. Yeah. That's the beauty of this main story anyway.
Yeah. Like for example, you like his first sort of hypothetical question, what happened to the Dwemer? There's like a whole quest line in Morrowind where you can like go through all this stuff, you talk to a Dwemer, you get like all these answers and things, and then it pretty much just says like, well, they're gone, and they might have disappeared because of these reasons, and as you can decide which one you like best, pretty much.
Yeah, I guess the Mages Guild quest line will explain the mystery of the Dwemer, right? And the main quest talks about what happened in Red Mountain.
Yeah, then you have the sermons that spell out foul murder.
Foul murder, yeah. Oh, the sermons, okay.
And also Vivek being like a real bastard right before you inevitably kill him. You don't have to kill him, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you?
Yeah. Did you, in your playthrough?
every time.
Oh, really?
Every single time.
So you fight with him, and then you get some cool loot from him.
No.
No, okay. Just the pleasure of killing him.
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh no.
Sometimes, even if I'm not doing the main quest, I'll just pay him a visit.
Yeah, but you can only pay him a visit once you start the main quest, right? Some point.
No, you just go visit him whenever.
No, but then, oh really?
You just break into his room.
Ooh.
It's like a 100 point lock with a trap on it, if I remember correctly.
So you actually unlock the door and actually enter and speak to him. Really?
Yeah. He tells you off. He says you're not meant to be here.
Ah, okay. He doesn't actually have the long discussion like when you actually go and meet him.
No, he's just like, you're not meant to be here, go away.
Ah, I was waiting for you. All that doesn't happen. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and then that's when you kill him. And then he's done. And then main quest is
sure.
failed, right? Main quest is failed. If you do that.
Well, yeah, but then you can just backdoor. Because he has the Wraith card on him.
Awesome. Okay, thank you so much, Spook. I think we should come back to this next time and continue with this with the next section, Drunk with Power. And this was awesome. And we'll see you guys again next time when we continue on the oral history of Morrowind.